Hello everyone, welcome back to another video on my channel. This will be another video in the video series that I'm doing where I will be going over every single one of my personal projects that I have on my GitHub. Well, first things first, let me introduce myself for those of you who are new here. My name is Lorenzo. I'm a postgraduate civil engineer who's currently transitioning into the tech field and studying information systems at PUC-RS. Today I'll be showing you a project that I'm doing on Node. It's using TypeScript programming language, and also it's employing the Nest.js framework. It's basically a backend application for a user service, a user creation and login authentication service uh, that connects to a MySQL database that I'm currently hosting on Microsoft's Azure. Before we get into the code, and I'll be doing a complete walkthrough and code review of the project in its current state, um, let me just go over the project's and all its dependencies and other modules that I'm employing because I'm using NPM, Node Packet Manager. And as I've said, it's using Nest as the framework, the base framework, right? And I will be connecting, so it's an API and backend, and I'll be connecting to my MySQL database utilizing Prisma ORM, so I can do every route handling and service and repository object in my database. Uh, I'm also using the JSON Web Token package to authenticate users' logins. So I have a route for a user login, and if everything is correctly and I can validate the username and password, well, actually I'm using email and password. It responds a valid JWT or a token that can be then validated for restricted routes. And for passwords, I'm using bcrypt to hash the passwords and store them safely in the database. All right, let's get into some code. All right, so for this demonstration, I'll firstly go over real quick through my code and explain some of the thoughts and the overall architecture that I have right now. So in my last project that I made, which is you can also find on my GitHub page, the last project I did was also an API for a backend utilizing Node. But for that one, it was developed in JavaScript, and it utilizes the framework Express. Sorry, the Express framework, which was really fun to get me into all this API and the frameworks for Java for Node. But this time around, I'm actually learning Nest, which, from what I've heard, is a much more commonly used uh, uh, framework. And you can tell it was really fun, getting to learn a lot about it. All everything from its modules and providers and controllers. It kind of tricks you into writing a well-organized code, which for a beginner is very, very useful, right? And right, so let's start off with my directories here. So I have as I said, I'm using Prisma ORM to do everything, the connections to my database. So in my source, I have basically four main modules. So how Nest works is it has, for everything that you're gonna do, you're gonna be working with modules, which are basically like the building bricks of this framework. And for every module, you have a controller, or you can have a controller, which will be do all the route handling, and the providers. So in the providers, you're gonna have your services, which in Nest they kind of work. as like freelance methods, and they're all injectable. So you can then use that dependency injection with these providers to inject them to any module that you want. So it's really fun actually, because you can then from the get-go start your whole architecture thinking about all the different modules that you'll have, the services within them, and if you need to work with cross module services, you can inject them into other modules. So for example, I have my app module, which will be, oh, and you need to have a main module, which will act as a parent module for every other one. So currently, my main module is app, and you can see that it imports every other module that I have, which are user module, authenticate module, and database module. And basically, my main script here, it just creates an S factory using the app module, which encapsulates every other module, and then starts listening on port 3000, so my server is actually working. So the app module, it basically that's it. It only imports other modules and then is used by the next factory. So let's start seeing firstly my users module. All right, so for my user module, it has its own directory here. For every module, you'll basically, as I've said before, you'll have your module, your controller, and your service. These are your basic files that you'll have. And it all starts on module. So you could see that my app module imports user module, which is this file right here. So for my module, I have we use in Nest, we use all these decorators, which are basically modifiers for classes, methods, parameters. So they're really useful because everything that you do, the backbone of this framework are going to be decorators. At first, it's a lot to take in, but once you get used to it, you can see how helpful these are, especially in organizing everything. And it's so easy to see. For example, I can see that this module, user module, utilizes the controller user controller, which will basically be the routes for the API, and providers user service, PDF service, and mapper service. So I know that these are the methods that are being injecting into this module. It also imports the database module, so it's using the methods from there, and it exports user service so it can be injected by other modules. So let's go into our controller, which will be our main controller here, since we're talking about it's an user creation and login application, right? So you can see that it's basically a class called user controller, and I do use my controller decorator, and in the parameter of this decorator, I'll then uh, enter the base route. So I know that every time that I go into my, which now is would be localhost at port 3000, every time that I go into that URL and just go into users, so the route users, I'll fall into this. Everything in the app module, it will find wherever I have this is exact URL, and then it will search inside this class for a method that corresponds to any sub routes. So for this user controller, this is actually the way that we inject uh, the methods for the services. We go inside our constructor for the class, and then we type in private read only, the name that will have this service inside our class, and what type it is. It's user service, so it's imported from user service. Let me just show you real quick what these methods actually look like. So you can see that once again we have a decorator, which is an injectable decorator, which then tells Nest that this can be used in any constructor if its module that is employing that constructor or the controller imports the module to which this, or actually imports the service. It's a little mouthful, but if I go into if I go into the user module again, you can see that it imports the database module. So by importing the database module, I could then inject everything that is in the database services, because in the database module, it's utilizing as a provider the user database service. All right, so let's go back into my controller. So I have a couple of methods here. I'll go into this one first, which are the CRUD operations, so basic operations. Let's first start at reading. So for this method, it's basically getting all users, so it's pretty simple. It says get users, but with the decorator, again, a nice way to organize routes with the get. So this translates directly into our requests, what type of requests that we're receiving on our API. So for example, if we're getting a get HTTP get request in our users route, it will then go into this, which is get users, which then in turn returns this user service, which is the user service that I have injected, dot show all users. So if I go into my user service, I can find the show all users here, which is an asynchronous method, since we're going to be reading from the database, which then calls in the database service, which is a service that I have injected, dot user, which is then translated from my schema, database schema, and find many. So it basically will return to my controller this information, and then the controller will return to the as a response everything from the database. So since we're already talking about connections to the database and reading the database, let me show you what is probably the backbone module that I have on this project, which is Prisma. Prisma is responsible for everything related to the database connections and also creating the schema. So the schema will basically be the structure of my database, its entities and every relation that I have on it, and you can set everything up from Prisma, directly from Prisma, without having to, searching for through Workbench, MySQL Workbench, for example. So Prisma takes care of everything. So basically, I have a main Prisma schema file, and here you can see that I create a client, I say which database I'm connecting to, and my .env, I have the database URL for the database that is currently in Microsoft's Azure, hosted in the website. And here you can see that I have two entities that I have created. So one entity is for the user, and every field and every attribute that I'll have for it. So I have an user ID, first name, last name, age, gender, birth date, and these are automatic fields that Prisma will populate every time that a new entity is created or updated. And I also have a credentials entity, which basically just for exercising and practicing relations inside Prisma, I separated the user from his credentials. So everything relating to passwords, email, username, and other attributes, I put in this credentials entity. And it's basically a one-to-one relation between the user entity and the credentials. So for credentials, I have the credentials ID, which will be the primary key for that entity, and it has the same decorators here. This is not Nest decorators. It would be Prisma. It's Prisma's decorators. So I can say that ID says that it's the primary key, and default it auto increments automatically. So every time that I create a new user, it will have a unique ID. So here I say that the relation between users is one-to-one, and the field that I'm referencing to is user ID. which is a user field, and my reference is user ID here on the credentials. These on delete property basically means that every time that I delete a user or a credential, it will automatically delete the credentials here, so I don't have, fake credentials or obsolete credentials inside my database. So that's pretty much my schema. I'll open the workbench right now so you can see how it's all working. Right, so now I have opened my MySQL workbench so I can connect directly into my database just to show you guys how the schema actually translates perfectly into a MySQL schema. So just to show you guys how that would look like, let me just close these queries right here. I don't have to save any of these. So this is the database, user authentication database. And if I open the tables, I will have my credentials table and my user table. If I go into user, this is currently the table. It's just some, sample data. So I have my each one of my users, and then the credentials, which are in relation, it's in a relation one to the users. I have their emails, username, passwords, and ranking. The ranking is just because I've created a restricted route to generate a report which basically has like some personal information, but it's a PDF report, which is pretty cool. And it only works if you're rank 4 or above. Uh, otherwise, it won't let you actually create a report. And for that, I'm using guards, but we'll get into it later. You can also see that it creates a third table in my database. This is basically for Prisma to um, control all the migrations that have happened, and it uses a hash checksum just to see, you know, the migrations in Prisma. Every time that you do a migration or change to the schema, it will save into the migrations folder, which is this one right here. And it basically can be interpreted as how does Prisma get from point A, which is a zero or a null empty database, to where the database is right now, and every single step along the way, how it was done. So every migration is its own separate file, which will then be SQL, the programming language of SQL. The cool thing is you don't really need to program anything in SQL. We're all using Prisma commands. All right, so that's enough from the database. You can see that the way we do that, in my user service, I have called a database service, which I then have injected. So let me show you what that database actually looks like, database module. So once again, I have the database module, which has a provider of database service, and we'll export that so I can inject it into my user service. And in this database service, it's basically inherits Prisma client and then implements on module init interface. So it basically connects into the database. And since Prisma, after you create the schema and generate uh, the schema, it also generates a bunch. Let's see if I can find it here. So node modules, uh, Prisma, it will be in my index, I think. Yeah, so you can see that it creates a bunch of types for us, which we will then use to actually connect or send data or update data in the database. So it's everything is generated here, and that will actually use in the database service. So you can see that once I'm in my user service and I want to call a find many, the database service has a property called user, which is my user entity. If I were to, for example, go here and do credentials, It also has the credentials property, which it generated, and I can do every one of these methods, such as find unique, find many, or update, delete, which were all generated automatically by Prisma, so in what we call the Prisma client. So the Prisma client is basically everything that you will actually do with your database that's specifically tailored for your current database. But this will leave as user and find many. All right, so there are three other things I'd like to show you before we get into a quick demonstration. And just a reminder, all of this code is available in the GitHub repo, so you can actually check it out for yourself and do give any feedback if you'd like. So the three things I want to show you, firstly, is the authentication module, which, as I've mentioned before, uses a JSON Web Token, which just to show you that I have a login. This login will then authenticate an email and password. And so this is the service that it uses. We firstly have an authentication, which will then send a sign-in, will validate the input, which is a DTO, which I'll get into in just a little bit. So it validates by finding the user in the database by email. If the user exists, then it compares by using Bcrypt's .compare method the input password and the user password, which was fetched, the user entity was fetched in the database. If it is, then it returns an user ID and username, which is already in the shape of a payload that I'm going to sign with the token. And if there's no signing data, it throws an unauthorized exception, so email or password was incorrect. So it returns the signing with the signing data, which the signing will just create a token payload, which is just to, correct the property names to sub, which is subject, which will be our user ID and the username. That was already correct. And it creates an access token using JWT services asynchronous sign. So everything here is asynchronous, so I need to work with promises. And it returns the access token and the user ID and username. Uh, I'll show you in the demonstration how it works correctly. Just, down to the T. Uh, I have the funny thing about working with Prisma is that Prisma creates all these types so we can correctly talk to the database. But for everything that is working in the API and everything before we connect into the database, we need to validate a lot of information, right? So there's many ways that data can be brought in by the front end. So we would like to use DTOs, which are data transfer objects. They basically create a type or a correct way for data to be, transferred along everything from the route handling all the way to the database. So basically, I have a create user DTO, update user DTO, and a user response. And I'm employing another module that I forgot to mention that I was using in this project, which is class validator, which you can see that again uses decorators. It basically creates a class which is my DTO, and he uses decorators to, validate, show NES what it needs to validate for every single one of my properties. So for example, my password here, I have said that it needs to be a string. If it's not, it won't accept the request and throw back a appropriate message showing that what needs to be changed. It must not be empty, so it's not an optional property. And this neat little validator here, which I like a lot, is strong password, which then I can throw in a few properties saying, for example, the minimum length has to be 8, minimal lowercase and uppercase needs to be 1, minimum numbers one and minimum symbols one, just to make sure that the password is actually safe enough. And so that's basically it for the DTOs. Which I wanted to show you that it, exactly because I have now two, let's say, frameworks or objects for transferring data, being one for validations that create user DTO, for example, and the Prisma type, which is called Prisma, I think it's create user input. I need to make these two things talk. So for that, I have created a couple of mappers. For example, I need to be able to map, once the request is going to the database, I need to map the create DTO into Prisma, which this method right here does exactly that. It receives as a parameter a create user DTO, and then transforms it into a Prisma input, which is type prisma.userCreate input, and then I can send it to the database without anything breaking. The same thing needs to be done from user entity into user response DTO. So everything works just fine. All right, so I'm back. I just had a little quick bathroom break. So I think the last thing I want to show you guys, the last part of this code review, before we can get into the actual demonstration, is the guards. So the guards are very interesting, another element of Nest that, well, actually, it's a pipeline um, transformation of the request object that we're receiving from the front end. So just like the validation pipe, which I'll be showing you guys that I'm actually using, the class validator is a validation pipe, which I can show you right here, for example, for creating a user on the post route, I actually send in the body with the validation type. So everything that is actually incorrect in the data object that I'm receiving in the body of this HTTP request won't be accepted. So just like the validation pipe, after it concludes all its analysis, I have a guard, which is basically for working, for authorizing uh, access to restricted routes. So for example, in my authentication module, I have a post here. I just created a sample route, which is on the auth route, and then followed by me. So if I send a get HTTP request to me, it actually, with the decorator here called use guards. So once again, it's another decorator. I can send in as a parameter the auth guard that I'm importing. So let me show you what that looks like right here. So I have my guards here in the auth. So basically, you create, it's a class, an injectable class, and it implements an interface called can activate. So you must rewrite this method, can activate, and it receives a context object called an execution context. So this execution context object is something, or class, it's something in Nest that helps everything that is done before the actual route handler, such as guards and the validation pipe, to actually get access to what's happening in the request. So with this context, we can use the switch to HTTP method and then get request to actually get the request. So for every restricted route, I will be sending in the header in the authorization property. So I can then go request.headers.authorization to get the bearer token. And then I just basically say that if there's no token, I send a bad request exception, or I try to actually verify it using the JWT service, which is from the JWT module. And if it's correctly, then it actually returns true. So by returning true to this guard, it will actually let the rest of the flow, the Nest handler, actually take the request and do whatever it needs to do. So this is basically how the guard works. So these are the two elements that I'm employing here that happen before the actual route handler even has the chance to get the request object, which is the validation pipe and the guards. You can see here that if I catch any error during the asynchronous verify method, it will throw an unauthorized exception, meaning access denied, validation failed. So for example, if my JWT token has expired. So I'm using 30 minutes for login. If that time span has expired, it won't let me actually access these restricted routes. All right, so to conclude this video, we're gonna end with a demonstration, a quick demonstration. So I have opened up Insomnia, which is the software I'll be using to, simulate every HTTP request that would be sent from my front end. But you can use any software you want. You can also use Postman, which I know is another popular one. So let's go into my backend user authentication collection, which is basically where I have saved every one of my routes. So I have for users, authentication, and reports, uh, a sample HTTP request that we can use. So firstly, let's boot up this application here in my VS Code, which I'll say npm run start dev. So it starts running in watch mode. So every change that I do, once I save, it will boot up again. And if everything goes well, we'll see some green text here, which is basically saying that every route has been successfully connected. So in any second now, it usually does not take this long. It's probably because I'm recording a video. All right, so everything is working just fine. Let's firstly test my get all users API, which is the one that I shown you in the code. So if I send a request, it then returns me everything that I currently have inside my database. So we have 4 users. And if I go into my workbench and do a select everything, you can see that I currently have 4 users. So it's correctly pulling everything from the database. Let me just quickly close all tabs here. And so for this demonstration, what I'll actually do is create a new account, which then I will try to log in into the account and then generate a PDF, a personal report for that account. So we'll go into the create API route. So I have in my body here my DTO, which the backend is expecting to receive. I'll put in some sample text here, which I'll call new user. So you guys will be 25. We can do a female that's born in 2000. New user, new user at Gmail, and new user password. All right, so just for a quick validation test, let's put just an N on the first name. It should actually tell us with a response, 400 status response, which is a bad request response, that the first name must be longer or equal to 3 characters. So everything in the validation is working. At the same time, if I type in an incorrect email or a not strong enough password, it should tell me both things. So the email must be an email and password is not strong enough. So let's correct both things and create a new user. All right, so new user has been created. If we go into the get API and send a new get request, there we go. New user is right there. And in my SQL database, which I'm just using, to validate everything that I'm getting just to make sure. Here you go. So user number 5 is now new user. Okay, so I don't think I don't remember what ranking I sent for the new user, but it's currently rank 4. All right, so that's perfect. Let's now do a login. So in the authentication API, login API, you can see that the URL is localhost at 3000 port, auth and login. In the body, I need to send an email and password. So I think it's new user. Oops. So it's new user at Gmail, and it's new user password 1. So let me just type in the password incorrectly. It will say unauthorized email or password incorrect. All right. Same thing with the email. Email must be an email. So I'm actually also using a class validator here for the login. So let's send the correct credentials, and in the response, I will have the access token. Let me just open GWT debugger here so you can see what the actual payload is inside this token. So let's quickly go to the debugger here. So if I type it right here, we can see that inside the payload, I have subject number 5, which is the correct user ID for the new user, username new user, the time of when it was issued at, which is almost 5, and the expiration time should be close to 5:30. So everything is correctly working in the token. It says signature verification failed because I'm not using my secret here. All right, so we'll copy this token here, which we know that is uh, for 30 minutes, it will be okay. We'll be able to log in or go inside restricted routes. And let's go into the generate report route, which is on URL users slash report. So we'll have two things that we need here. The first thing is we have to adapt the header because now the bearer is this token right here. If I type in instead of 8 an A, so I typo in my token, it will say the JWT service will verify it and see that it does not match with what my secret would sign it. So it says access denied. So let's correct it into an 8. Now you'd think that would work, but access is also denied because it's not allowed for current user ring. Let me just show you real quick what in the code this route looks like, because it's an interesting route right here. Get report. It's an interesting route because it's actually employing two guards. So it employs them in the order they're typed here. So first, it will try to authenticate the user with GWT. Then it goes into a rank guard, which is just to make sure that the user's rank is 4 or above. And if you remember correctly, currently my user, which is new user, is ranked number 3. So the first thing we'll have to do is actually update the user. So with update on the URL, we say the user's ID, and we can update just the credentials. So to rank number 4. It sends me back the user response DTO, which we can see that the rank is now number 4 or rank 4. If we go in the MySQL workbench again, new user is now rank 4. So now when we try to generate a report again, since the bearer token is okay, and now my rank is matching or is 4 and above, it'll go past both guards, and I should get a report PDF in the response. And there we go. So I'll just quickly download it here so I can show you. I'll just save it anywhere so I can show you what it looks like. So this PDF is done using PDF Kit, which is another package that I have installed here with npm. So it just basically gives a standard user report, which says everything, all the stats that the user has, of course, not the password. And that's pretty much it. It was a restricted uh, uh, route that we successfully created a user for and authenticated and generated a report for. All right, so that's pretty much it for today's code review and demonstration. I know it was a long one, so thank you guys for staying this long. If you did and you'd like to give me any feedbacks on the code itself or video formats, please feel free to comment it on the comment section below. And once again, thank you for watching.